To order the City of Monona Plan Commission meeting for Monday, October 27th. Roll call, please.
Chair Bussey.
Here.
Alder Holmquist.
Here.
Mr. Dorschel.
Here.
Mr. Ganzer.
Here.
Mr. Kugel.
Here.
Mr. Stein.
Here.
Mr. Hamburg.
Here.
Ms. Devenish is not here.
Item number 3, approval of minutes from October 13th, 2014. Do we have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, revisions, corrections? Going once, going twice, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, minutes are carried. Appearances. I have Mr. Don Paulson, 714 Woodlawn Drive, Madison, would like to speak for informational purposes on the redevelopment District 9. Mr. Paulson?
You want to start now?
Yep, right now.
I thought it was later on in the agenda.
There's not a public hearing on that item, so giving you the opportunity now to discuss it.
Good evening. My name is Don Paulson. I'm a member of the Four Lakes Yacht Club, who is one of the properties that's being considered tonight. I'm not on the board of directors, so I can't speak for the organization, but I was on the board of directors. They're having their current monthly meeting this evening at the same time. So they asked me if I would go here and keep them informed as far as what's going on. I talked with Sonia today, and the little map that's included in the stuff that was on your, I'm not sure, website, lists properties number 3 and 4 as being the Four Lakes Yacht Club's property, which it is. Some things that that you should be aware of, that we are very concerned with what's going on, obviously, because we intend to stay there, and we're not in favor of a walkway along the river because we store boats there and it's fenced and locked, and so that the only people that have access to it are members of the organization. A few years ago, we made an agreement with the folks that own the building where the bank is, and I believe it's number
18.
16. We have, again, a fenced area along the river, so we control the boat slips that are in that area. We have a 99-year lease on that area, so, you know, again, we're not interested in a walkway along there because of the protecting of the property. And in addition to that, on this little piece, and I'm not sure why the Four Lakes Yacht Club's property shows in 2 pieces. The little piece, and I haven't been able to find out all the details of it, there's a small building on the front of that property that fronts on the road that is a Wisconsin Telephone Company building. And somehow or another, they lease the property from the yacht club, and somehow or another, and I'm not sure exactly how, in my opinion, they illegally acquired that piece of property by having their building there, and I'm not sure how long a time frame by law. If they were there, then they automatically acquire the property, whether we like it or not. And so that little building that's on the front of the property belongs to the telephone company. And I'm not sure how big the property is, because it doesn't go all the way to the lake or all the way to the river. All it is the property where the building is. And the balance of the property behind the building has been boat storage for as long as I can remember, and probably for a lot longer than that. Then I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have concerning the yacht club's position on the whole thing, and naturally we're interested, and that's why I'm here.
Don, a quick question. You said you got a 99-year lease with, is that, when did that begin, and what's the term of that?
It began when I was on the board, and so it's probably about 5 years old. And so, you know, we got 95 more or 94 more years to go.
Any other questions for Mr. Paulson? All righty, thank you so much. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on an item that's not on the agenda or not a public hearing? Seeing none, we'll close the appearance section Move on to 5A, unfinished business. Public hearing on request by Anthony Harper, Legacy Martial Arts, for a zoning permit to operate a martial arts studio at 6203 Monona Drive. Mr. Harper?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you all back here again. We had submitted the proposal from Jim Andrews on the request from the City Council to provide more green and beautification for the outside of the building, and hopefully it meets with your approval. Jim Andrews is here tonight to answer your questions if you have any at this time. If not, I would love to hear an approval from you guys.
Thank you. We also have James Andrews.
Yes, sir.
And did you want to speak? Okay, just be available, all right? But you're listed at 6203 Monona Drive in favor. Anthony Harper?
Yes, sir.
Yep, you're here. Spoke in favor. And Kenneth Bent?
Here.
Is here, and didn't list your position, but what would that be?
I'm the president of the company. I'm actually the master instructor at the school when we do get a chance to open or do what we have to do. But yeah, I'm the go-to guy, I guess.
Thank you. Well, if you guys want to, anyone else wish to speak? If not, we'll close the public hearing section and move on to consideration of action. If you just want to stay there in
Yes,
case
sir.
there's any questions, that'd be great. Okay, move on to 5B, consideration of action on the request. Sonia?
This proposal was last reviewed at the October 13th Plan Commission meeting, and at that meeting, the Plan Commission requested additional information on landscaping and the dumpster enclosure. So staff's recommendation is for approval with those items included as outlined in the staff report.
Thank you. Discussion? Mr. Amberg?
Could I get the projector on, please? Maybe?
The guy sleeping back there?
Yeah. Here we go, it's coming. Something's happening.
There you go.
No.
No?
Are they working on the overhead? Okay. The overhead? You had it on there before. Oh, it works. We just need, if you can put the overhead on there instead of the camera. Thank you. Beautiful.
There you are. Thanks.
It's not working well. Oh, it's better on the back. Okay, couple questions.
Yes, sir.
Do you know where your property line is on this building?
Mr. Andrews?
About 3 feet to the
North of this wall?
Yes.
That's where I would have guessed it to. It looks pretty close. So really, this is landscape right now. It's your neighbor's property. Oh, I'm off the projector. This little area here has landscaping in it right now, and it's actually, most of this would be your neighbor's property.
Right.
So I don't think your intention is to go in there and re-landscape that for them, is it?
Well, it looks kind of tacky. I don't think there's nothing been done there. So
Well,
I prefer to just go in.
I guess that'd be between you guys, but most of this landscaping along this whole side would be on their property.
No, because I own 3 feet to the other side.
Right, and this looks like it's, I don't know, Isaiah, probably 5, 6, 7 feet, so you're probably, maybe you're,
No.
you think you're right, okay. So that was the one thing I was worried about, number one was that. And my second comment, I drove by there today, so I dug out our handout from last time. And who made the count of 29 parking stalls? I see it was in our report, but I didn't see anything in the applicant's data. And the reason I bring it up is, again, your property line is probably somewhere in here. Would I be right?
About halfway in between that.
Right here, halfway, so you extrapolate, it's probably here, so these 2 stalls are probably for the daycare, and these 8 and 6, so you've probably got right around 14, give or take, stalls right here. You can see a couple of people park back here, and maybe somebody parks alongside the drive to pick up a kid, but I don't know where the 29 stalls is coming from that we talked about. Because if you remember our discussions, oh, we got all kinds of parking. This is the first time we'll ever have more parking than we need for a use like this. So my concern goes back to what we talked about last week. I think for taking half the building right now and the class sizes you're proposing and you using the other half solely as your own office with 1 or 2 vehicles, I think it works parking wise. But I think it could be an issue in the future, and we don't know. This is probably the best case scenario for us because you can occupy it and see how your class is going. You have enough, excuse me, enough parking. Obviously, you kill yourself if you don't have enough parking.
Right.
And I'm just concerned. I don't know where the sharing will come. If perhaps your biggest class time and you're on your neighbor's parking a little bit when there's nobody at the daycare. I don't know how that'll work out. But time having you in the building right now would help us. But I see a condition on here talking about that parking because we don't have 29 stalls or whatever was mentioned last time.
Okay.
You could debate how many stalls are here. It depends. Keep your employees in the back whenever you can. And you'll see where your customers are coming.
There's a question I wanted to ask. Jim, how many feet are between the left side of the building to those those blocks there?
And the bumper blocks on the south side of the building.
It's like 20 feet? 20 feet. You know, actually, if I don't know if Jim thought about it, putting angle parking there?
Well, angle wouldn't work, but I think the previous occupant at times had some parallel parking in there. So a car could park and you could still get by and get to the back.
Okay.
It's tight. It doesn't meet ordinance, but in a time of pickups or maybe a few employees being there where you're not worried about them parking themselves in or out, it really just behooves you to keep the front as open as you can for your clientele, and you'll get a feel for that. But it will be an issue for if you come back and want to have 4 classes. We're going to need to see what kind of parking requirements you have now and if it'll work, or if you.
That's another reason we're taking out that trash area, because that occupies basically 2 spots back there.
Yeah, it's right here all the way to your property line where these 2 are pulled in. It's kind of hard to park back there, but again, you could probably get some employee parking or something. You certainly wouldn't want to bring the general public back there. But yeah, that trash thing right now, for those that aren't aware, it comes all the way back, really virtually a property line back here. It's a large enclosure.
Yeah.
So that was all to illustrate, 2 things. I don't, if this is on your property, that's great, and I think it's nice to fix this area up like you are. It'll add a lot to the curb appeal of the building. The building has virtually no green space around it right now. I think that's great, and just the parking to illustrate that we need to be a little bit careful with that for this building in the future. Excuse me, which we normally have with that type of use, and it really comes back to you, how you use it. So that's it. Thank you.
And I'd
Any
like to
other
address the
comments?
thing with the, 1 second, please. When you had mentioned if we have more classes, more parking space problems, that's not the way it would work, because there's only so many kids per class that's going to take place. So if I had 3 classes on a Saturday, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, noon,
Those parents leave.
they leave. It's a continual cycle, so that there's never a grouping of cars at one time.
Right, I wasn't worried about that as much as if you take over the whole building and you have 3 classes or 4 classes going on at the same time.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I think you're okay with the parking
Okay.
you have. I don't think you have any excess like we thought last time.
No.
Right.
But I think if you're incredibly successul and you want to, expand and use the whole building, then we have to figure out where your parking needs are and based on what you have.
Okay.
Compared to what you have.
All right.
Thanks.
Any other discussion? Is there a motion? Robert?
Move approval, conditions 1, 2, and 3, right, as written by staff. Condition 4, that future use of the building may be limited based upon parking needs versus availability.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Last chance for discussion, seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.
I want to thank everybody for your time. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Moving on to 6A, which is public hearing on request by Gary Brink and Associates, representing Encore Construction and Terma LLC for revisions to the building elevations approved for the Lake Edge apartment development at 4035, 4037 Monona Drive. Good evening.
Hi there. My name is AJ Robichek from representing Gary Brink and Associates as well as the rest of the project team. What I'll start with is passing along the sample here, the dark iron spot modular brick that you see in the new elevations. Basically, we made a move from the nickel leadstone veneer to the Endicott dark iron spot brick for a multitude of reasons. Economics were involved. Also, we had some meetings with the development team and also finally with the owners. And the decision has been made to move forward with the dark iron spot. I know in the original elevations that you had received, we had two options. We had the dark iron spot or the gray blend. What's shown in the elevations and what's also shown on that material sheet is the dark iron spot brick. As you can see, it's a very unique style and very unique look. So we think it complements the rest of the building materials that were originally proposed and have not changed since our original proposal. And other than that, I am available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Anyone else? Nope, we're good. Okay, we'll close the public hearing, move on to 6B, consideration of action. Sonia.
The Lake Edge apartment building was originally approved in March 2014 with the fieldstone veneer that was included in your packets. This request is a change to just the building materials, switching out the fieldstone for the iron spot brick, and there are no other changes to the site plans or building height or mass or any other part of the plans.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Mr. Emberg?
One question.
Yes.
Good. I'm just curious, what size will that brick be?
It'll be modular,
So it's a little bigger than what's shown on that board?
a little larger.
Yeah, it'd be more of a,
Yeah.
like regular modular? Okay,
Yes,
which
regular
really,
modular.
that would actually fit really well with the scale of the building. I was just curious because the sample we had is pretty small brick. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion, comments? Seeing none, there are applicants requesting consideration of action. Do we have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. And there's an event this week, I hear.
There is. Please join us.
Congratulations. Move on to new business 6C, public hearing on request by Steve Doran, SWD Acquisitions LLC, presented by architect Brad Koenig, Schlufer Architects, I hope I said that right, for the development of a multi-tenant commercial building on a portion of the property at 101 West Broadway. Good evening, welcome.
Can we have the overhead again, please? Can we do the overhead? Oh, you heard it already. Thank you. You see it right? Yeah, you can actually see it a lot better on that one than that one.
Can't focus. Trying to see it, I guess.
Push it further up.
I can see pretty good on mine.
No, you can kind of see. You can kind of see it, I guess. I'm here tonight to talk about a proposed retail center in front of what is currently the American Hotel on the corner of East Broadway and Monona Drive. I currently have an agreement in place with the owner of the American Inn to buy about an acre of land, which they have on their books as excess land. And we have site planned a retail center. Just from a point of reference, this is Monona Drive here, and this is West Broadway right here. So the signalized intersection is on this corner here. I've been working on this project for about just under 3 years now, and finally, within the last year, got approval from the seller on a site plan location, a building location. There's several concerns he's had with where the building would potentially lie on the site, uses in the building, and et cetera. And he didn't initially didn't want to block the visibility of his hotel with a retail building, but we worked together to come up with a way that the building could sit on the site and still allow him good sight lines. And finally started talking to some users for the retail building that we thought were good users for the corner, but also good users for the city of Monona. They're users that are not currently in the market right now. While I can't necessarily disclose them tonight, I will be able to at the final plan commission. At that time, I will have leases signed. There are, there are going to be concerns, I'm sure, from plan commission about trees that are currently located on the site that we do have to take down for the development. We worked really hard on the site plan to come up with a plan to save as many of the trees as we could, and worked with a tree expert to analyze the existing condition and longevity of all the trees. And actually, Bruce Allison, who is the tree expert that we hired, is going to come tonight to answer any questions and be able to give a copy of the report that he did on the existing trees there. And Bruce is probably familiar to some people, maybe on Plan Commission. He's the one that did, he's done some previous studies for the city. He did, the study for Woodland Park, where the tree fell out over on Monona Drive that one time. And so, very reputable tree expert in this area. I think before we even get to that, I'll let Brad kind of talk about the building itself, the architectural, what we're trying to achieve, and then I guess open it up for questions.
Well, thank you. My name is Brad Conan with Schulfer Architects. So looking at the site plan, again, what Steve mentioned before was that we tried to place the building in relationship to the American Hotel to maintain visibilities basically from the corner of Monona Drive and West Broadway. That was their main concern. And so although the retail side of us said, let's push it to the corner, there was some negotiating there, and basically the placement of the building was far enough away from the main canopy for the drop-off of the American, and also gave us kind of two distinct parking areas. So we tried to break up the parking areas with the building in between. And doing so would allow on the east side a drive-through to be entered in through the farthest east aisle of the parking lot, and then loop around to the east side of the building, and then exit essentially where the canopy begins for the American. And we felt that after many revisions and looking at it a number of different ways, we felt that was the most efficient and would allow us to maintain a larger area for the stormwater management pond, which is designated right in this area. Essentially is the same depression that exists there on the corner. So we're maintaining or enhancing that. I don't know where that went, but enhancing that existing stormwater area. And then again, like I said, we're splitting the parking into two smaller parking areas, and that way it will minimize the distance that people would have to travel and to go from one side of the building to the other. We're maintaining kind of the existing parking for a majority of the American Inn site, And then we are repaving a portion of it where it fronts the new building. Again, it would be the north of the building. North of the building, there's the single row in front of the building there. So that really exists, but we're repaving due to grades and et cetera. Like Steve mentioned, we tried to look at many ways to save as many of the trees as possible, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But kind of in exchange of that, what we had to do was basically eliminate, I think there's 25 trees that we will have to cut down. Some of them are in poor condition. But we would replace them with, a significant amount of landscaping. There we go. Significant amount of landscaping, both in front of the drive-through to mask that drive lane, but also give visibility to both the building and the American. We have foundation plantings along the south side of the building, and that continues along the south side of the parking on the west side. We tried to put then larger caliber trees in islands in order to repopulate that site again. And I think I think the design with the building in the center and the parking areas, I don't think you'll feel a massive parking area out there. And so that's what we tried to accomplish was if we were going to be replacing trees, we would be, replacing them in a manner that kind of tries to mask that parking area, tries to mask the drive-through as best as possible in that manner. Let's see. From the building standpoint, again, as a consideration to American, it's not necessarily shown on this plan, but we wanted to keep the building low. The approximate height of the highest roof is about 20 feet, so the American will still be visible behind it. We tried to keep the building as low as possible and still maintain good sight lines and for signage and et cetera to our building. Materials we're looking at, and they're not really showing up very clear here, but like a tongue and groove cedar with a clear honey stain on it to brighten up the building and give it a little different look. And that would be mostly on the signage bands and at the corner elements. We have then some split face masonry to give it a little bit of texture. And then also where we have some relief areas where the building steps back, we have some ephes. And then to differentiate the center to tenants, the siding, it's a 5-inch lap siding, kind of an engineered cement board siding. And again, this is kind of conceptual in nature, but we feel this is a nice product that would be maybe a little different architectural style than what's in that area right now. But with the single slope kind of roof lines, give it a more dramatic appearance than just a straight roof line, typical retail center. This would be a wood-framed building, single slope roof to the south, but with the parapets and the roof forms that we have, I don't think it feels like an 18-foot, tall retail center. We tried to vary the roof heights and the direction of the roofs as well to kind of mask that and make it look smaller than it actually is. Again, the building's 8,600 square feet. We are looking at a larger trellis to the west for a potential restaurant client or tenant. And that's shown on the west elevation there, and it shows up again in the north and the south elevations. As kind of a large patio area for outdoor seating. There would also be a smaller patio area on the northeast side for that potential tenant as well. And again, these were included in your packets, but just for those in attendance, a couple of perspectives of the building from each corner. You kind of see how those roof planes interact with each other and try to break up the building. Parking wise, we looked at parking, we tried to maximize parking. We looked at the parking counts that are required, by the parking ordinance. We are in the updated site plan that was sent to you. We created a kind of a schedule, basically, of shared parking use. And this was just our attempt to kind of show as we are sharing the parking with American and have had discussions with them about, use, when their high use is and when our high use may be, and try to balance that parking ratio. And so we came up with a matrix there in 4-hour increments, just kind of what we thought our percentages would be, and then based on the counts. And our total parking count is 106, I believe, per the ordinance, it would be 122. So we are about 16 stalls short in general. But if you look at the matrix and you kind of look at the percentage of times where busy times or peak times, peak usage, I think we still fall kind of underneath that total of 106. And I think there's some room for some flexibility if there is a weekend football game where they would be busy on a Friday night or even a Saturday night, and then combined with the potential restaurant uses. It might be full, but I don't think it's excessively full. And in the 80 or 95% of the other times, I think that the parking lot would be utilized pretty efficiently in that manner. So that's all I have, unless there's other questions or.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none. Come on up.
May I bring this up?
Yeah, come on up.
I own property that adjoins this property.
If you could-
I own duplexes on Westgate.
We're being recorded, so if you could state your name and address for us, please.
My name is Joyce Seafring, and I own property on Westgate. I own 3 duplexes that back up to this kind of, and what I'm concerned about is what's the fencing or wall or anything that divides it, because that drive all becomes pretty close in there. I'm also disappointed, of course, to see all the trees gone. And I'm looking at the pictures, and it shows trees that are 20 feet tall or something, and I'm wondering how long that's going to take. They're not going to look like that right away, I don't think. So that's a concern that I have, because there's residential property that's right adjoins this, and that's what my concern is. There also are single-family homes. Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
No, I think Jim, Bruce, who is the tree expert I hired, just walked in. It might
Sure.
be good for him to
Yep.
kind of give an overview of the
Yep.
study he did
Yeah.
on the,
Yes,
on the
please.
trees there, because I'm sure there's questions about that, and he can explain it better than I certainly can. So I don't know if Bruce, if you can you just give an overview of the project. We haven't talked much about.
Okay.
So
Good.
just to give you and to introduce Bruce, I hired Bruce to analyze what the condition of the trees were on site right now, which ones we should target to try to save, what could we do to remedy the situation from displacing trees and creating a new landscaping plan to account for what we're removing, and really just get a better understanding of what we're dealing with there. Because as much as I'm not in the business of cutting trees down, I'm not interested in cutting trees to cut trees. So Bruce went out there, spent a substantial amount of time understanding what condition the trees are. Bruce has got a very strong background in this area. As I mentioned earlier, the city has actually hired him to perform work in the past. So Bruce, I'll let you kind of just run with.
Okay, great. Well,
What
thank
you
you
do best.
very much. Yeah, Steve Duran just hired me to take a look at the group of trees out there, and it identified in his site plan there were a cluster of trees that were designated for being saved, and they'd be on the northeast corner of the property, just on the east side of the existing American building along Monona Drive. And I will just pass along.
Right up here and point.
Over here, okay.
There you go.
So here's a photo of that particular cluster. And my recommendation, there were white and red oaks in this cluster. My recommendation is that they would need a very strict tree protection plan. The site plan that I have seen doesn't look like there's any construction going on there, but nonetheless, during the construction process, there could be utility going in, there could be people that want to park their vehicles underneath there, all sorts of things that can have an adverse effect upon those trees that have been designated for being protected. My recommendation is that they create a simple tree protection plan, and I've already outlined what that should be in terms of putting up some sort of a fence, preferably either chain link fence, or if that's not reasonable, then just a simple snow fence with a top line across there. So many times I've been at construction sites where they do not put that top rail across, and all the best intentions, but 2 weeks later, it's sagging down there, which simply says, I don't care anymore. So you have to have a top rail across there to really keep people out. All that, in my opinion, should be included in the construction contract, and there should be either the project superintendent or the project manager designated as the responsible party. In other words, if something goes wrong, you've got somebody to point your finger at and say you're responsible, and maybe even build in some penalties for unnecessarily doing damage to that particular group of trees that have been protected. He then asked me to also do an inventory of the other trees with focus on what could be called the so-called legacy trees. That is, the trees that are the largest size that really stand out in that particular area, and what condition are they in relative to with the fact that the current plan is suggesting removal. The biggest trees, of course, are a cluster of red oaks, and here's a picture sort of midway looking to the west. And if you take a look at here, here, and here are the largest trees. They happen to be red oaks, which are fairly fast-growing trees compared to the white oaks that are there and the hickory oaks, or hickory that are there. I then used some pretty sophisticated tools to be able to see what's going on the inside, because like any other case, it's not what you see, but what you don't see that can come back and bite you sometimes. And I noticed that there was what I call elephant foot. Typically, a healthy tree is going to have buttress roots with valleys going in. These were filling in, and it's called compensatory wood, so it kind of looks like an elephant foot there. So that told me that there was probably some decay on the inside, because trees are pretty remarkable organisms that have the ability to compensate when you don't have that mechanical area for those stresses that are coming from wind and the ambient weight of the tree down to the roots, where according to Newtonian laws of motion, where you have to have a reciprocal force to keep it standing. So when that happens, that living part of the tree, which is the outside annual ring, is stimulated to lay down additional wood. So that's why you've got visible signs of something going on the inside. I have two tools that I use when I do research at the Forest Products Lab. One is called an acoustic tomography, where I use sound waves on multiple sensors to take a look at a transverse section of the tree. And I kept it pretty low because I was looking for root rot issues, which is the most problematic type of defect on trees. And I'll just show you for the 3 red oaks that are in question, which again are 1, 2, 3. The first one, which I could designate as G, this is the tomograph. And again, the method, the science behind this is you've got 12 sensors. They're called piezoelectric sensors. That is, piezo is Greek for the pressure. So you can hit something there, and the sound wave is then generated. It goes to the other sensors, which, because they're sensitive to that leading edge of that impact-induced sound wave, triggers a stop signal that goes into my computer and says, all right, it took so many microseconds to go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and use projection software to be able to display it as an image. And now the image is displayed in 4 colors. Blue is the area of low density, that is the area that had the slowest movement of the sound wave. And of course, if you had a cavity or low density from incipient decay, the sound wave has to bypass that, and so it's perceived as taking longer. So that shows you that, yeah, you've got a bigger problem. Interpretation is really important because there could be a crack in there. A crack would give that same signature on the tomogram. So that's G. Here's H. You can see again signaling some big problems. Here's L, which, if you know the site, is the larger red oak near the parking lot. It's got a codominant branch. It's got a smaller branch going up and a big central branch. And between those, as those two branches grow together, they include the bark, so it's called included bark. There's an axiom in arboriculture that it's not a matter of if, but when codominance will fail. It's just a structurally weak area that can split apart. So that really what I would call very anomalous look on that one indicates that it isn't necessarily a big pocket of decay, but rather it's that included bark that's keeping the sound waves from going through, and that's going all the way down to 12-inch elevation, which tells you that that other branch began growing at a pretty early age. So having that information, I then used another tool which is called a resistograph. It's developed in Germany. It's got a very small 1.5 millimeter shaft that goes in about 40 centimeters, and I'm measuring the torque resistance as it's going in, and that tells you the change in density. And if you've ever worked, any kind of a drill, you know that if you're going through soft wood, it's pretty easy to go through. But if you're going through harder wood, more dense wood, it's hard to make that go through. What this machine is really measuring is the electrical impedance of that motor. How much draw is that motor taking in order to turn that thing through? And then it displays it as a graph, and I'll show you, I did resistographs on other trees also. Here is the white oak, what I call white oak A, which is the white oak which is nearer to Monona Drive, still on Broadway, so it's the most easterly of those trees. And you can see that the graph has higher amplitude. Higher amplitude means more dense wood. There's what I call a systemic error that comes in, that is that graph, and ideally would just be sort of more level there as it goes through, but because there's more shaft as it goes in deeper, up to 16 inches deep, 40 centimeters, you get more resistance, and so there's more draw needed, so you get that little increase. You have to kind of ignore that as you interpret it. So that's a normative resistograph. And let's go to G. So here's G, and I'm coming in this direction, a radial entry at 10-inch elevation. The area of the trunk that I was going through was 45 inches, and so I'm going in 16, not quite halfway. And I can see that my cavity is starting around that 8-inch depth, and then it's going in to an area of hollow in the center. It's just all flattened out. And let's go to H. And you can see that I got about 5 inches in, and all of a sudden it drops right on down. Now, ironically, on H, there's a very small little hole that you wouldn't notice unless you were just sort of looking carefully, where you can look in there and you can see, yes, indeed, it's all hollowed on the inside. And then on the other large red oak, which is L, here's my resistograph. And here you see again, just something's funny going on here. As I'm going through, this is just sapwood, and of course it's always going to be less dense there because it's just a different type of wood than you get as you progress further, and that's sort of the bark area. Going through, it looks pretty normal. All those little up and down valley would suggest that it's, it's good solid wood, because wood is, it's called anisotropic. In any different direction you go, it's not isotropic. A stick of butter is isotropic. No matter where you go, it's all going to be the same density and consistency. Trees aren't that way. It's going to kind of go up and down from early wood, late wood, all those different annual rings. And so you'd expect to see that little bumping on the top. when the saprophytic fungus enters to cause a problem, or if you go through a cavity, it all of a sudden, like at the end here, starts to get flattened out. And that's because decay causes all that order that the tree has spent so much time laying down with the cellulose, the hemicellulose, and lignin in a very orderly way, to all of a sudden become dissolved and disorderly. And so you don't have that same structure that you did before. So as I go through there, I'm hitting clearly a couple of those cracks that I would expect in an older red oak. And then at 15, I'm entering a cavity there. So if this was not a codominant and I had all of that good wood, would I say, well, the tree's fine? I mean, because a tube, a pipe that is, can be equally as strong as a solid rod. It's that tensile strength that's holding this thing up. The Eiffel Tower is 100 meters tall, and it's all a bunch of pipes. However, the problem here is that codominant and that included bark, where you've got significantly increased probability of falling apart. Putting cables up there is always a possibility, but on a red oak it's less able to deal with decay than a white or a burr or a sugar maple. You've got other problems. So those three of the larger trees had what I would call significant to profound defects anyway, which just perhaps relieves some of the anxiety about taking down that tree. Would I have recommended taking these trees down if there was not construction going on, if it had just been called in by American and said, what's going on here? I probably would have been tempted to say, yes, those three should be removed, because tree risk assessment is considering not only the probability of falling, but the consequences of falling. And there you've got, not only parked cars, but people that are, coming there and have an expectation of a higher level of being protected from unexpected things. So I did other resistographs on other trees, and some of the white oaks are looking great. Some have just a little bit of decay. This is the most profound area of decay. And the age of the trees is such that even though they're big, red oaks grow pretty quickly. They're certainly less than 100 years old, and could be in that area of 80 or so. I do the work for the Department of Administration on the Capitol Park trees, which are planted by John Nolan. I mean, these trees were exactly, when they came in 1915, so they're about 100 years old and considerably bigger than this. So you can sort of gauge from that as my standard as to how old these might be. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any for me to address.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak during the public hearing? If not, gentlemen, if you'd like to maybe hang there while we move into the next section, which is the pre-hearing conference on the request. So an opportunity for the commission to express their or give their feedback to the applicant. Sandy, do you want to kick us off?
So this is a pre-hearing conference. No action should be taken tonight. I've listed areas for the Plan Commission to discuss, including the land use. There is a 66-seat restaurant, a 60-seat restaurant, and 2 retail or office tenants in the building. Compatibility with other plans and performance standards that I've outlined in the staff report. Quantitative standards, including parking, where the applicants are about 17 parking stalls short of the minimum. Landscaping standards and green space standards. There'll be less than the 30% required by the code, as well as the design, location of the drive-throughs, sidewalk, and architecture. And finally, engineering review will be completed by our consulting engineer, Darren Pope, but not for today's meeting.
Thank you. Commission members. Mr. Ganser.
My first question relates, and I can't quite get a sense of it on here, but do you know how the setback of your building relates to the setback across the street, the retail on the other side of Broadway? Are we feeling that it's close or consistent to the setback?
You know, I haven't taken a measurement of that. We can certainly do so. We're 10 feet to the building from our property line. We're also in coordination with the above power lines, and we have to be at least that far back because their power lines run within I think the easement there. So we're from the edge of Broadway to the building is close to 20 feet, I would say, if not 20 more, 25.
25 from the curb?
From the curb. I would say across the street, they might be slightly farther away than that. They might be 30.
Okay. You said the maximum building height was 22?
Right now it's around 20 to 22.
And the hotel is?
I think the eave of, there's 3 stories. They're 35, I think, to the eave, and that has a pitched roof on it, so at 612.
So we're clearly going to be, really from most angles, we're going to see that hotel.
You'll see, yeah, you'll see at least the top floor of that hotel, if not more of it, plus the roof. And that's if you were just to stand on Broadway perpendicular to our building and look straight across. From the corner of Broadway and, Monona, you'd be able to see 99% of that building.
Because I'm really slow with math, how many of the existing trees are staying on the property? How many are coming down, and the number of new deciduous trees going in?
I think there was 4 on the northeast side, and there was 2 for sure on the southwest side, and potentially up to 4 that we were trying to save. And there's we counted everything. We counted the trees that were 30, the big red oaks that were 36. We counted the trees that were 3 and 4 inches wide, wherever they were. So in the total number of trees that come down, including everything, is 25. Is that correct, Bruce?
Let's see, if the 2 that you had mentioned on the most westerly side, the 2 by the property line,
Yep.
that would be
24. 23, yeah, okay.
And then, so what about, what's the number on the site that we're not touching on, or that remain, existing trees that remain?
8 to 10.
Along Broadway and along Monona, I don't have an exact count, but there's approximately 8 to 10 that are staying. And then I think 24 going. And then we are currently on the landscape plan, we're showing about 16 new trees. And that does not include shrubs, and that's just caliber trees.
Okay. That is all I have for now.
Thank you. Mr. Omberg.
For me, this is a tough one because when I look at it, there's probably at least twice as much building here as it belongs on this site. And I'm trying to look at a way to make this fit, and I can't come up with one. When we originally put the American Inn in there, we worked long and hard on this site to try to balance the green space, the trees. We had an arborist that time to look at all the trees. There were some weak ones. There's some that were okay. There's some that are great, and that's always the case. I happened to be with another arborist last week, and we were trying to save ash trees. And we looked at them, and he made an honest assessment. He said, Chris, I can look at any group of trees, and I can find 80% of them, I can find faults. I can find something wrong. So, I mean, the trees might not be perfect, but there's a lot of really good trees in here. And this will substantially change the character of this entire area by clear cutting the frontage on Broadway, other than the 2 on the west, and putting this in with virtually no green space. The green space was a huge component of the American Inn also. And not only is this site way deficient on green space, I'm not sure how we ever would even consider a calculation that says, well, I'm going to take the remaining green space and put it in an overall calculation, and we'll both be deficient instead of just my project being way under. Did you do a calculation for within the property line, or what, 10% green space? Or what do you
Yeah, I
have?
mean, yeah.
I mean, just looking at it by eye, it's maybe 10%, and this is not a reconstruct area. We're taking a green site. This isn't like when we have a site that's all building and parking lot. We're trying to get them, come up a little bit. Can you get to 10 or 15? This is a site that's beautiful right now, and it adds a lot of character to that entire intersection. When we put American Inn in, we always considered there could be a possibility for an outbuilding out here, but we were looking at something that might be one of these 60-seat restaurants with parking for it, and really incorporating into that area and saving some of those trees and just wrapping it and have this nice little addition to American Inn. But what's here right now is wiping the area out and starting with mostly roof, asphalt, and concrete. I don't know any other way to put it. I'd like to come up with something constructive other than cutting your building in a third, but this is just so far over the top for what you're doing to that area, for me, for the character of it, for what we've developed there. I think even to the point of we worked hard on that west driveway. It would have been better over where you have it. It would have lined up a lot better. But we kept it away from those oak trees to try to save those trees. And if you looked at those trees, the one that it got too close to, it's about dead. I'm sure you looked at the one that's closest to that radius. I wouldn't look at it again tonight. It's not dead, it's gone, and that's from getting too close to it. Now what we're going to do is take the healthy trees and move the driveway over next to them, which will likely have a substantial effect on their remaining life. So for me, I mean, I could talk about a lot of the details. A major one for me is the architecture. I know you're trying to keep visibility for the hotel, but if you look around there, every building that's been built there has really hit those River Place standards and on drive design guidelines. Right across from you is River Place, which hits that architecture. Kitty Corner is Pier 37. I mean, even if you look at the PDQ buildings, long before we had those design guidelines, and even they have a sloped shingled roof, which they all kind of hit that architecture. They all have substantial brick instead of just split face block. A split face block for a lower level or something to ground the building, but then they have brick or stone come up into them. So I could talk about the architecture and certainly a slope shingled roof, but to me, beyond that right now for what you're proposing, this big of a building and that much asphalt is way too much for the site and is completely changing the character of that area.
Rob, any comments?
I would tend to agree on the impact of how much green space you're going to lose on a site that's already, or a site that it does have beauty and it does kind of it's kind of a cornerstone for that intersection. Now, I don't want to be anti-development and someone that's trying to have a viable business, but it is a big impact cutting down 25 trees, some good, some are bad, and planting, by my counts, 10 canopy trees. And then there's other shorter ornamental, some pears and lilacs. I don't know if it fits the motif of that corridor.
Okay. Mr. Kugel.
Well, Mr. Homburg brought up a point that I wasn't even thinking of, because you're going to take this piece of property that you want to build on will be your property, right? I mean, it's going to be plotted a new lot.
Yes and no. Everything here is going to be shared. I mean, to answer the question on green space, could we buy additionally green space? Yeah, but we're really looking at this as a combined development with the hotel.
You might have an agreement with it, but it's still two separate plots. And if somebody came in and said, I want to develop this piece of property, this 1 acre or whatever it is, and and basically have 10% green space on it, and the rest parking lot in the building, we'd never approve it. But when I'm looking at this, it says there's 30% green space required, and you're saying you're going to have 25%. Well, you're not going to have 25%. The whole corner's going to have 25%.
Well, I guess we can shift the lot lines around to increase the green space, is what I'm saying. We can give all this parking lot back to the hotel. We can push. I looked at it more globally and like the best way to lay the site out for the project for the city. But to get that green space requirement up, we can shift this lot line around so that we're buying more of the green space and they're keeping more of the parking lot. That's just a matter of semantics on the lot line.
Well, I think it's a little more than that. I mean, I'm looking at 60, basically have a 125-seat restaurant between the two. And if there was some off-street parking, it might be, but there's no off-street parking around here. It's either this parking lot or nowhere. I mean, you can't park anywhere else. If the lot's full, there's really no place to go, I want to say park in Tully's and walk over someplace else. So, I mean, you're way short on parking, even with shared with the hotel.
Yeah, part of that is for the shared parking agreement, we have, some retail users that we think are going to frequent this building, not when the hotel is going to be using. The restaurant on the east side of the building is a heavily lunch-used building. There's not many people staying overnight in a hotel at lunch. So that, that's part of our method to our shared parking agreement.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say one thing about what Dennis was mentioning, and on the green space. Having a convoluted property line that came up here doesn't really solve the problem. All this green space that was meant to front the hotel and front this area on Broadway is gone, and on Broadway we've got a sidewalk and 10 foot away a building, 5 foot away parking lot. There's no buffer. There's this beautiful corridor is all gone right through here. So what it changes is everything along here. The green space, the major green space is here along the side of the hotel, along the back of the hotel, and over here. That it doesn't, I mean, by changing the property line, it doesn't change the effect that you've had on the property. Was the point I was trying to make.
Alder Holmquist?
I don't know where to start, but I mean, clearly some of the same concerns exist regarding the removal of the green space. When with that said, when I look at the aerial photo of this location, and I look at other people that touch this intersection and try to give some kind of analysis to what these 4 sites bring to that corner, there are pieces of this that I think are uniquely different than some of the other sites, and I'm supportive of looking at this site differently. With that said, for example, the River Place area, there still is a substantial amount of buffer between Broadway and their buildings, which allow that. If there were things that were similar that allowed a similar sense of a buffer, I could see the consistency among other locations in the area. At the Pier properties, there's a buffer from the parking to the Monona Drive section, which I think is consistent with the River Place area. The PDQ, that's prior to that, and I think that's a different story altogether. So I'm trying to look at the piece from that side because I know, trees is the big thing, parking's the second big thing, and I'm trying to be constructive with some feedback on how might there be ways to increase the buffer to be consistent with other properties in the area. When it comes to parking, I think that is a fair concern that when you have restaurants, despite what tenant it is now, it could be what tenant is there after that first tenant, and it might be a different tenant that might not be a lunch tenant, it might be something different. Some of the other areas around here that are restaurant driven, if I look at that Starbucks kind of area where Noodles and Quiznos, you go there 8 in the morning to get a cup of coffee, or at lunchtime, it's a challenge to find parking. I think that's underserved there as well, but what's uniquely different about that area is it has a sea of parking next to it at the grocery store that I think accommodates some of that. The spill over here, I don't know where it would go. There's some neighboring businesses, but that's a little of a different kind of concern for me. Those are the 2 biggest, because I know those are the 2 biggest hurdles. When we get to, if we got over those first 2 hurdles, I think there's some more feedback. Thanks.
Sharon?
Yeah, I could, this is a tough one. I could say ditto to the people that have just spoken ahead of me. I see a lot of issues with this. Not the least of are the shortage of the 17 parking stalls. As Brian just mentioned, I was going to bring up too, over by Noodles, it's a total challenge, and I know a lot of people have left because of lack of parking at certain times of the day, but exactly the reason that he mentioned, there is parking that you can go to there if you need to. Here, there's no relief, so if there's no parking, you're going to pull back out in the street and maybe go around again or whatever. I just see that as a real issue, and I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice to allow that amount of shortage on this property. A lot of other things that I see, the huge amount of asphalt, the drive-through space going here, the lack of setback from the street. I'm concerned with the building style, and to me, the style and the materials would need to be in concert with the hotel and the area guidelines. I'm not sure what the caliper size of the trees that you were talking about that you might be replacing the ones that we would be losing with, but to me it would have to be really good scale trees. I mean, to me it's not a 2-inch or a 3-inch caliper. It's something, it's one of those big diggers that goes in and takes out a tree somewhere and would have to transplant them here, and I don't even know that you have room for that kind of thing going in. So I could go on and on, but we've talked about a lot of things, so I totally understand why 2 restaurants would want to be here. This has got to be a hot corner, I mean, in the 2 locations, but there's got to be a better way of trying to accomplish something if this is the location. It's just too much in too tight of a space, and it's just a really tough one, so, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Dorschel?
Well, I share all of the concerns that have been mentioned, the architecture, the parking, the lack of green space, and I guess it comes down to what Sharon just said, that I think there's just too much commercial area being proposed for this lot, given the amount of space that's available.
One of the neighbors expressed concern regarding noise. I don't know if that area that you've got facing the west, you know, what is planned there, would that be something that would potentially disturb neighbors? I don't know where your mechanicals are going. Are they rooftop mounted?
Rooftop.
Are they going to be screened?
Yep.
Because typically we'd want to see what your plans are for something like that. Bikes. I mean, there's connections with Monona Drive, so how you would address handling the bikes that would want to come. Anything else from the commission? Mr. Kugel?
Yeah, I was looking at this shared parking peak usage thing, and you would call, on this little table you have on A1.0, 10 and 4, let's just look at 10 and 4, between 4 and 8 o'clock, which would be the dinner hour. And it's a 66-seat restaurant, and you're predicting, or somebody is predicting, there'd be a maximum of 11 cars at that restaurant at peak time for 66 seats. Assuming 2 people in a car at 22, that place would be like a third full at peak time. Same with tenant A2, you're saying with 60 seats in a restaurant, which is a pretty good sized restaurant, you have a total of 10 cars needing that space from 4 o'clock till 8 o'clock. Unless I'm reading this wrong.
The tenant 1, so the A2 occupancy that we have at 50%, that's at 100%. It's a predominantly, the use is predominantly a noon kind of restaurant. It's not a evening, and what would happen is that's the one with the drive-through, and so the drive-through, these are estimates, but the drive-through would be more predominantly used in the evening than it would be during the day. The tenant 4, that's based on the required counts, because I think for that is only totally of 22 for that restaurant. For the 60, I mean, that's the total.
I just
22 stalls for that 66
I just
seat
think of a
restaurant.
60-seat restaurant is something there's a lot of people in it. If you have 60 seats in a restaurant, you would hope that it's, on a busy day, would be 40 40 people would be in there. And if you had a restaurant with 60 seats, I would think your drive-through business wouldn't be as much. And I'm just thinking of Big Mike Super Subs, Subways, et cetera, that have drive-through. They usually have seating for 15 people, 20 people in there. So not knowing the type of people that are going in here,
That doesn't equate to the stalls per the ordinance, I guess is what I'm saying, because you have one car per, I think, 3 seats.
Right.
So
you need 20.
It does seem low, I agree, but based on the ordinance and the percentages, that's how it was.
Mr. Ember?
Well, the ordinance is a minimum. We look at the uses, and it's one stall, I think, per 3 seats plus your employees or whatever, and it really is based on the use. So even our ordinance would be over 20. I think the 20 we're getting at is the patrons. I believe, correct?
It just says 1 per 3 seats in the restaurant.
How we've applied it in the past is we've looked at those uses and 1 per 3 for the patrons and looked at some employees. But I mean, that's, we're not close enough right now. I mean, we could, if we're adding 27 stalls, that's like 99, but those are numbers that are going to change, and I don't know if we need to sift through it all. I mean, regardless of what happens, I would suspect at the very most we'd be looking at another pre-hearing conference with a substantially revised proposal. I mean, so I don't, I beat you up enough already. I don't want to be here beating you up.
I don't feel beat up.
Okay, but I don't want to, to go through details and stuff, if this is going to change a lot, I think the big thing tonight is where does everybody sit on this use, intensity, general architecture, things like that. And so you guys can go back and see what you might want to do.
Yeah.
Propose.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
You bet.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So just to kind of go, I just want to kind of go through the list of issues to try to better understand importance. And let's start with parking. And I built a lot of shopping centers, and I am usually wanting way more parking than a city will require from me. And so this is, I think, the first time that I've ever been asked to put more parking on a site than required. A couple comments to that. One, we will encourage bike traffic here. That'll be a small amount, but we will encourage it. We've got, bike parking on site, and we will encourage that. The user on the east end cap is primarily a drive-through business. And so we don't see a tremendous, we don't see the need for all those parking specific for that user. The user on the west end capped is primarily a sit-down food and dining type business, so they will use a lot of parking. We spent countless hours with the operator of the American Inn to try to determine what his peak parking requirements were, and I'd be happy to have him come talk to anyone as well. But most of his guests aren't coming in until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, when most of my guests are gone. So part of the reason we did a shared parking agreement with him, part of the reason we designed the building placement and the stalls and the positions that we did was driven to satisfy his needs as well, because he was more concerned about parking than anybody. He needs parking for his guests, and that was much more important to him than selling a piece of land and building a shopping center. Now, he likes this. He likes the idea of bringing restaurants that his hotel guests can, visit, but by and far, parking was probably a bigger concern to him than anything. Simply, we can meet the parking requirement. We can shrink the building a little bit. We can change the use to a retail use. We'll meet it right there. We leave the building the same size it is and change the west end cap to a retail use, and we would meet that. So the parking is something I think we can all get comfortable with. Because again, from an operator standpoint, and that's what I typically am most concerned about, I want to be comfortable with parking because I'm in this for the long haul. I'm not building this to sell it. I'm building this to hold it long term. The tenants in the shopping center aren't going to be successful unless they have enough parking. So it's very important to me. Building architectural, we tried to do something a little unique and different here. We certainly can look across the street to Pier 37 and the River Place development for some, you can key in some of those elements into.
And right behind you,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
hotel.
yep, and bring in some elements from the hotel. We wanted to create a unique and different offering here, okay? Because the users that we have coming here are unique and different to Monona. I've had so many different users want to be in this development, okay? But I've turned down probably 8 out of 10 because I've been so focused on who I want in here. Unique users that aren't currently in the city of Monona that I think add something, add some vibrancy to the community, add a different element that isn't currently here. Part of that reasoning on the retail or the design of the building was influenced by some of the users that are coming, okay? But again, we're happy to change the architecture to meet something that better fits in with the surrounding buildings. Got parking, got architecture. The closeness of the building to the street. Originally, we had this building pushed a little bit closer to the American Inn Hotel, which created a little bit narrow drive aisle in here, and it also created a little bit shallower building. Right now, this building is at about 65-foot depth, which is 60 to 65 is perfect for, retail restaurant space. We certainly can shrink that down a little bit to create a little bit more buffer there to match what's across the street on the River Place development, what David Simon's building. We didn't do that partly because the 65-foot depth was preferred, and because in looking at the Broadway design guidelines, the urban edge type feel, pushing the building as close to you can to the street, is what is called out for. So we tried to follow the Broadway design guidelines and push the building as close as we could to the street as possible.
That's probably Monona Drive, that's probably not Broadway, is it?
This is part of the Broadway design
It is.
guideline district.
I'm not aware of a building there that's done that. Not one. I think you're mixing the Monona Drive design guidelines, called for some of that.
I think you're probably referring to Monona Drive.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll double check it. Okay. So yeah, we certainly can look at that. The canopy trees that you had mentioned, we absolutely can, I didn't have any intentions of doing 1-inch or 2-inch caliper trees in the islands. I mean, taking down the trees here is a big deal to me as well, and I want to replace the landscaping on this site with something that is just as vibrant, okay? So we will look hard at the sizing of the trees that we place in the island, and we'll actually go back to the drawing board on our landscape plan and try to make sure that we're putting back as many trees on the site as that we're taking away. Did I miss any other key elements?
Green space.
Yeah, so the green space, what I was commenting to you before, Andrew, was that we can buy a smaller site. So we could buy, a site that, the American Inn keeps that, and we can buy a pad. We could buy 8,000 square feet, and
I'd still look at the green space on what you're doing.
And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at it globally. Right now, we're at 25%, where the minimum requirement's 30. So we're not trying to look at what is our green space for our site. We're trying to look at what is the green space for the whole site with the hotel after we build.
I think what you're going to find us looking at is what is the green space for what you're building, and particularly what do you have here versus having green space back here and over here. It's the lack of it here, which was left intentionally for both the hotel and would be looked at for anything here. If I could give an unsolicited opinion, and you probably don't want it, but I think you have too much building here. I think everything we're looking at keeps going back to saying there's too much building. If you took part of this building off, whether it's retail, restaurant, whatever, and you might not like losing those, but you solve a lot of your problems by taking a narrow building and sliding up, and don't try to have a few stalls against it, get your parking this way, and you can develop some nice green space here, and there's some areas where you want to try to get your drive-through. You might be closer, but you're building, I bet these buildings over on the other side are 20 feet further back than yours are. I don't know the vision, but they're quite a ways back from the sidewalk. But something like, it's something, And I know you do a great job thinking outside the box, but it's going to take something really outside the box to figure out how to get that into there. It's not just a little massage, I don't think, here and there.
We'll take a look at that building across the street. I guess my
And
main
you-
question is if we can, the green space requirement is 30%.
Minimal,
Okay.
yes.
Minimal. If we can meet the green space requirement for the overall site with what we're building and what's there right now, does that seem reasonable?
I don't think we can answer that question for you tonight.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's for you to, make your best case when you come.
And I think, we've thought about a lot of different things. We've thought about trying to do pervious pavement to try to just, really come up with everything that maximizes the proper drainage, but, okay. So I think I got all the 4 issues.
Mr. Umberg?
Could I add one comment?
Sure.
For me, if you could find a way to save one of the nicer stands of trees somewhere, I don't know how, whether it's a big island here or there, or however you rearrange it, because no matter what you plant, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, a tree growing in this tree island will never, ever even come close to approaching the majesty of what's there right now. There are always going to be parking lot trees and islands, so if there's any way to find an area of this, so we're not wiping out that entire oak area, it would be nice. It would, for me, it would go a long ways to try to save some of it and maintain some of the character of that corner.
Yeah. And we tried to save them in the areas we could, but you can ask him, if we tried to save one tree right here, you would eventually, you'd either have to stay how many feet away from it, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet away from it, or it would eventually
If
die.
that's the case, then you shouldn't be moving this driveway over right next to these. There's 2 here that are pretty healthy, I think, and there's one that looks really bad and one that might be marginal. But that's another concern, moving that driveway right next to them. That certainly affects their health. And that, was moved to get 3 more stalls, 1, 2, 3. I mean, it's not worth it to get that close to those trees.
Any other comments from the commission? Steve, thank you.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate everyone's
That was
comments.
fine. Thank you.
We will close the pre-hearing conference, move on to 6D, Draft Redevelopment Area 9, Project Plan Discussion and Presentation by consultant Scott Harrington, Vanderwall and Associates. Good evening.
Got a PowerPoint to roll up here real quickly.
Sounds good. And
did you want to stay for it?
I will be recusing myself from any discussion on this.
Oh, yeah.
And
Now we can make some real decisions. No. Yeah.
Good evening, Scott Harrington and Ashley Robinson with Vanderwall and Associates. Pleased to make this presentation tonight. What you see tonight is essentially what will be presented tomorrow night at the Community Development Authority at the formal public hearing for what's being called redevelopment area number 9. Just a quick background on the firm and me. We've been involved with this project for about a year now. Became very involved earlier in the year when the city decided to start acquiring properties and developing a process for how they wanted to go about developing the site. So there are several of us in the firm working on the project. I'm the project manager, but in addition to doing the redevelopment area plan, we're currently working on
a detailed master plan for the entire site and assisting the city in its discussions with Gorman and Company, who responded to the RFQ that the city put out earlier and has an exclusive right to negotiate for at least the residential portion of the property right now. We hope to be back in front of you probably around the first of the year with what that master plan looks like. And the concept would be that the CDA would bring forward that plan as effectively their plan and probably pursue planned community district. What do you?
Planned community development with a
Planned
general
community
development
development.
process.
So PUD, whatever, as a general, the first step, general plan, and then as each piece of the project would develop, it would come back to you as a site-specific plan. So tonight, we're really here to talk about the redevelopment area and what that means, the blight finding that goes with that, what that was based on, and what the general concept is for redevelopment. Being redevelopment area number 9, you've got 8 others, and so I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with what these are and how they work. But they're a pretty powerful tool under the state statute, especially when you have a city that is, like yourself, being very proactive in bringing about redevelopment and acquiring sites and seeking developers. It gives the CDA a lot of authority and to some extent a lot of protection under the statute on how to go through a process like that. Of course, private property owners still have their rights, and that's part of what's built into this process as well. But it's given what you have planned, it's really the right thing to do. The purpose of these plans is to serve as a general framework or guide for the various area and redevelopment projects under this section, and more precisely planned and calculated. So these have some level of specificity, but stop a little bit short. Each developer is going to have their own twist on it. The market will kind of change over time and sort of help really gauge how large a project is, if it's residential, how many units, how tall, that type of thing. That's why you have zoning and where you kind of come into the process. But in general, the idea here is to really look at an area, determine what its redevelopment potential is, sort of put forward a concept of that and a process for bringing that about. Wrong way. So, blight kind of has a long definition in the statute. We just try to kind of bullet out some of the key things here. Again, I'm sure you're familiar with this. And also important to point out that the statute defines blighted property and blighted area. So those are related, but they're two separate things. And in this sense, we have a number of blighted properties, and then on the whole, we have a blighted area. But we're talking about substandard structures, poor street layout, bad access, unsafe conditions, diversity of ownership, and other things that really arrest the sound growth and development of the community. This is the area after meeting with the CDA a couple of times this summer about what did we want to include in this particular redevelopment area. And what was brought in here is the entire triangle area that I'm sure you're familiar with. And then the 3 properties on the south side of Broadway there at the intersection with Bridge Road. There was consideration of should it go further east along Broadway and what other things could be brought into it, but the idea was to really focus on this particular area, which certainly the north part of Broadway, that's really where the emphasis is right now in terms of bringing about redevelopment, and where the city's been very proactive in acquiring property and obtaining purchase options for a lot of the property. So I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with it. It's all pretty much commercial. There is the MMSD sewer pump station in the very north end. See this guy right up here. But everything else is commercial or commercial-like. The yacht club is, I don't know, sort of a fraternal type use, but they have a tenant as a restaurant. So that's what you got right now. In doing our blight analysis, we effectively found that everything but the bank and then the daycare met one or more of the criteria for being blighted. So it's important to understand that, that definition of blight isn't just buildings that are falling down, but, could be underuse. The former EDS office building, is essentially vacant or has been for most of the time. That structure may or may not really be adaptable to another use. So blight doesn't necessarily mean that it's a, slum and visually blighted, although you certainly have quite a bit of that in this area too. But it can be more, if you will, kind of an economic blight of misuse. Putting a sewer pump station on a riverfront, today is probably not something you would want to do. So idea in the plan, and if you followed this process at all and had a chance to read the requests for qualifications that went out to developers, really identified some very high-level goals. And working with the CDA and the city's committee on this, really adamant that wanting to create a unique destination and something that the whole community would really associate with, be proud of, and make use of. And a big part of that is getting access to the river. So both of those are important elements that we would look for in any project that would go here. And really looking this as part of a larger riverfront corridor. How do we connect this to Tresta and on down the line? And also, how do we think about this in terms of a larger Broadway corridor? Want to increase the assessed value, obviously eliminate the blight, really have high quality architecture and kind of a mix of uses. And then certainly, not the least thing is to really improve the stormwater management. This area is, 98% paved roof and parking lot, and it all pretty much flows just straight into the river. So whatever we do here, we want to really clean that situation up, treat that stormwater, and really improve not only the site, but then obviously the quality of the river itself. So the plan adoption process is this presentation tonight. Tomorrow night is the formal public hearing, and then it will go to the City Council for approval on the 17th. And then under the statute, it comes back to the CDA for final ratification, just in the event that the council would make any changes. So this process started, probably back in August, I think is when we really started to undertake the plan, and we're nearing the end of it. Just real quick, this is really more for kind of tomorrow night, but there is an opportunity for people in the area to file an objection. An objection is in no way any kind of a veto. Even if everybody in the district filed an objection, there's nothing that stops the process if the CDA and the City Council wish to go forward. There are perhaps some statutory advantages to somebody in the event that the city should ever decide to use its powers of condemnation and you filed an objection. It gives you sort of a higher standing, but given that the city owns or has options on most of the property, that's probably unlikely. There may be one or two objections, but that's pretty typical in a district like this. So there is a process to go through for filing that. I don't believe any have been filed as of yet, but people have until 15 days after the hearing to put one on file if they wish. So it's a very quick walkthrough after a lengthy item before the agenda. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I can bring up any of these graphics again. I assume you all have a copy of the plan and can certainly answer any specific questions on what's in the document.
Members?
I got a question. The first thing that comes to mind to me is under quality design and density, create a development with an appropriate balance of residential, service, retail, office, and green space uses. Is there something that's done in advance for, say, the triangle in this particular case, I mean, based on its size? Is there some kind of formula that establishes those numbers?
I guess the short answer to that is no. There's a lot of different ways you can look at it. We are working with a few different concepts right now, and like so many projects, probably the biggest driver is parking. And so the question is, based on the area that you have to work with, and even assuming that there may be, I'll call it under building parking, right up against the river. I don't know that we would go down below the existing elevation. So when we're on the east end of the site, let me kind of bring this up. So when we're kind of down in this area, you know, the ground level is just a few feet above the sort of water height. So going down below there, we'd certainly have a lot of groundwater issues. And I mean, it can be done. It's expensive, and it's certainly expensive to maintain. But then the site really starts to rise as you move to the west. And so by the time you're up here, you know, you're almost 10 feet higher than you are down by the river. So putting parking under buildings kind of throughout the project where it may appear to be, quote, underground, but it's really in some areas at grade, is an option, and then maybe surface parking on top of that. So to go back to your question, parking really ends up kind of driving a lot then of, okay, how many residential units can we get, and how tall would those buildings be, and looking at it from that regard. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that there's potentially a lot of expense involved here. Certainly assembling this property is not cheap. And so the city has made quite an investment in that, and any developer would too, in terms of exercising the options that the city has. There's then the issue of having to demolish what's on site. If we're talking about putting parking under a building, it certainly would, like under EDS, you know, kind of dig out back here. That has costs. There's utilities that kind of crisscross the site that may have to be relocated. And there's been a lot of discussion about perhaps reconfiguring the waterfront in some way to really bring the water kind of into the site rather than sort of up against the water, but to really make it more of an amenity and a really central focal point of the project by bringing it in. So that involves a lot of cost. And in order to do that, then, assuming that we'll end up with a tax increment district here, which is what the CDA's plan is for next year, we got to have a balance between how much we got all these things that we want to do, these public improvements and these expenditures. Then we got to get development of a certain value that will generate the increment in order to pay for that. So we're looking at it that way as well. What are our costs? What are our values need to be? And sort of look, yikes, how big is the project going to be, maybe based on parking and some other physical constraints, then, okay, we can only get development up to this density and intensity, up to this value, then these are only the things that we can afford, and maybe aspects of what we'd like to do kind of drop off, and trying to find that balance. So I don't know if that didn't give you a numerical answer, but kind of more of a process answer of working through it. And as I said, we're working on a detailed master plan right now that will kind of cover all of that. This plan's a little bit ahead of that. That's not unusual. Again, a redevelopment plan like this should be a little bit generalized. You know, things change over time, and if you get overly precise in a plan like this, then you need to kind of come back and keep amending it. Where this really, I think, tries to kind of paint a picture and a vision of what we're looking for, and then allows flexibility both at the CDA and then you as Plan Commission on how that actually gets executed. And your zoning still applies. I can't emphasize that enough. The property's still zoned at whatever district it's going to be, and those controls are in place unless you decide to do something else.
So as an example, you talk about in terms of value to the city, or at least I read this as value to the city, you know, maybe from a tax standpoint, and then value from the community in terms of a citizen standpoint. Is there, am I correct in assuming that a commercial or public use building like a hotel is of greater value than, say, multifamily? Is that, and I'm,
yeah,
that is a question I don't know.
And I get another great planning answer. It depends. You know, the value.
Better than that.
I will. The value in the multifamily, you know, one, is it condo, is it rental? Condo would tend to be higher. I don't believe that we'll probably see condos here, certainly not in a first phase. We'll probably be looking more at rental. But rental, you can still go higher end. We're working on some projects in Shorewood Hills right now where they're looking at $100,000 to $120,000 a unit, $120,000 as the assessment for the unit. So, and our hope would be to have something, about that caliber here. So on a per square foot basis, hotels kind of get tricky in terms of the way the assessors look at them. Does it have meeting facilities? Is there a restaurant in it? How big are the rooms? What's the income potential? So a hotel, in terms of a per square foot basis, could be about that. It may be less. I've worked with some hotels where I was really surprised at how much lower the assessment is than I would have figured based on the construction costs. So construction cost doesn't always equal assessment value. There are other factors when we're talking commercial that go into it. What I would say is that, we're hoping to achieve about, I'd say, a minimum of 40 million on this site. Be nice to have more, we'll look at options for that. And right now, as I say, we're hoping to achieve that. I can't sit here and by any means promise that, but those are the kind of densities and intensities that we would be looking at to try to get up to somewhere in that level. Because to do all the things that we want to do, and I use we collectively, the city, we're working for you, that's about what it's going to take to deal with all of the issues that I mentioned before in terms of acquisition, site clearance, utility relocation, and alteration of the waterfront.
Thank you.
Other questions? To try to get you to answer one more time. You're looking at $40 to $50 million worth of built-out value. You must have had some balls in the air juggling to try. Is 30% residential and 70% commercial, or where is the CDA or the city looking to
guess,
land there?
Yeah, I think in general what we're looking at right now, let me try to get the mouse up here again. I think we're trying, we're looking mostly at residential for kind of this northern end of the site. We're looking at some kind of a public space in the middle of the site, and then anchored by a hotel restaurant down here. On the public space, the residential that would front that potentially could be mixed use with some ground floor retail or restaurant. Ditto with a hotel, could have additional commercial associated with it on that frontage. And then back here, we're still looking at a couple of different options. Frankly, it'd be nice to put another office building of some type, maybe in this location here. Those tend to assess out very well. So on a per square foot basis, office would be fabulous in terms of bringing up the values. And then in this area, I'm still kind of looking at it. Part of the issue is what's the ultimate fate of this particular property. This is really about the only one that the city doesn't have control over, that really in some way or another doesn't fit the mold of what we're talking about ultimately for occurring in the area.
Okay, I mean, I asked, and really the assessed value isn't the whole value to the city. Obviously, if you can pull in a hotel, that's a huge value to bring the people in and everything else. I think this is a great project. I think it's an awesome vision. I think as long as we can maintain our commercial base, and it looks like we're going to maintain it and expand it, and then still add the residential component, it fits real well. What is your intention on the south side of Broadway? Our intention.
Yeah, that's right. As far as the detailed planning right now, it's focused here. I think the idea here is that this really could become another, very important, should become a very important node in this Broadway corridor. So, you've got, obviously you just spent a lot of time talking about Broadway, Monona Drive, and that. You've got WPS just to the west of here, and then on out to the Beltline. So this really could be quite an area that would kind of stand on its own, yet fit in that larger scheme of what I was saying. So down here, more office could be an option. A couple of different things that we could be looking at down here. I would clearly, sort of call this a phase 2. I mean, this project alone will probably have at least 2, maybe 4 phases of development before it's all done. this would occur, well after I would think that this started, to kind of show people what could go on. This intersection, we know from just a design and functionality standpoint, needs to be revisited, and so how would that change in configuration affect these parcels? That's another reason why, frankly, they were added. But in terms of their ultimate use, we're still working on that. But I would generally say that's going to be more commercial than residential.
That's kind of the root of why I asked that. From a planning commission standpoint, I don't see residential as a good use south of the up Broadway right there. And in your document on page 9, the second to last paragraph, you talk about the south viability. Proximity to WPS, you said it makes it ideal space for offices, residential projects, and or dining establishments. I'd suggest we change that to ideal space for offices, retail, and or dining establishments. We've gone through some of this with where is residential appropriate, where is it not, and I wouldn't, from a planning and a land use perspective, I wouldn't want a developer or someone to come and say, oh, yeah, that'd be a great place for an apartment building, because I don't believe it is. And if we have that verbiage in the plan, it suggests that we think it is.
Right.
So.
No, I wouldn't object to taking that out, because that was really not what we would be looking at first off, so.
And you talked about utility relocations. Are you anticipating relocating that force main that goes underneath the bank building?
We're looking at a couple different options, some that might leave it in place, some that might only relocate a portion of it, some that might relocate all of it. We have, the city has reached out to MMSD. They provided a cost estimate and sort of two alternatives. Neither of the alternatives that they look at would probably be anything that we would look at. One actually kind of put it right up against the river. I think that's going in the wrong direction. I think the thing needs to kind of come more inland.
Right.
Part of it, a lot of it will be sort of how this site gets designed, and can we kind of keep it sort of running in between buildings, maybe under public space or in a new road that might, transverse this area. It is, it's very expensive. On the other hand, what's there now is pretty old. It was put in the early 60s, so it's as old as I am.
That old, huh?
Yeah. It's, so for a sewer line, that's starting to kind of push it. And I guess the issue is that if that thing is only got so much more life expectancy in it, wouldn't it make more sense to sort of deal with that now rather than kind of build a project and then come back in later and try to figure out, how do we deal with that?
I only ask because it somewhat limits our flexibility on a pretty major parcel as far as what you can do and how you can enjoy the water from there.
Right. So we'll be, looking. We do have a map. I think we have it in 11 by 17 tonight. But we know the city had a complete survey done, and then from the city's GIS and from Madison's GIS, we know where all the utilities are, and so we're taking that into account as we're looking at different options. And like I said, it's, it all comes down to it's just a matter of cost, and is what we gain by relocating that line and spending that money outweigh what we, the cost of having to do that, or can we work around it and somehow get something as much or almost as good and then spare ourselves that expense. And I should also say there really hasn't been detailed discussion with MMSD about if we did want to relocate it or change it, what would they be willing to put in? They've kind of thrown out a cost estimate, but we haven't started any kind of negotiation about, well, what would you pay? Because this line's old and, we'll pay you a deferred amount, or haven't gone there at all. So it's a little early to tell.
I was just really more interested in the planning aspect of what we can do in there, and if that flexibility is even available. Thanks.
Sure.
Other questions?
I have a quick one. Since the city did acquire the city taxpayers, whoever acquired some of these properties that have options on them, it would be nice to have some public space somewhere on this piece of property. And you had talked about a cut-in potentially from the river.
Mm-hmm.
But what I heard tonight from the fellow from the Four Lakes Yacht Club, it seems like they do control that entire water frontage, either through ownership or easements or whatever it is, 99 years. So for whatever purpose here, if you're going to cut in somewhere, the city's going to come and cut in somewhere off the Ohio River. The Four Lakes Yacht Club is going to be the ones that would have to grant access to get into that place.
Do they control the?
Well, they don't,
Inland?
right, they don't control inland marine, so everything in front of the inland marine store is.
They don't control in front
They
of
do
you?
not.
Okay.
No, inland marine,
Thanks.
inland marine does, and the city has an option on that entire
Good,
property,
okay.
which would include that waterfront. Also, the yacht club sort of had a, I guess as I sort of understand it, sort of a longstanding gentleman's agreement with MMSD for these slips up here on the north
Right.
end. And MMSD has indicated that, you know, if they're public use for that area, that they would be in favor of that. There's no long-term lock-in on the yacht club on that part of it.
Then I misunderstood. I thought they
Right.
had the whole stretch
No.
they had access to, so
Right.
the inland boats is not part of that.
No.
Okay.
And, you know, the yacht club is aware of the planning that's been done and will, you know, there'll be further discussion with them about maybe other options for them or how they would like to interface, you know, with the project. So it's possible that areas that they currently can control could be reconfigured with them as, you know, a full partner, kind of, if you will, in the deal.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Two comments. I talked about the south end, and I hope we conveyed to the businesses that are there now, they're good businesses. They're all solid businesses right now, and I hope they don't think we're trying to push them out, because we do have a restaurant. Restaurants are sometimes hard to get, and the daycare and the tire store might not be the highest best use, but they're a solid business right now.
Mhm.
And then the other comment was really directly to you. It's a formatting thing, and it seems to me the only thing I read in this whole document that was made out of entire capital letters was Van de Waal and Associates.
Oh.
And it seems like that should probably maybe just have a capital V and capital A. If the thing we want to stand out the most, I know you want to stand out, but.
Fair enough.
Administrator Marsh?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a question Mr. Homburg had. Sonia and I did meet with all of the businesses, not only the tenants in the rental spaces, but we met with the property owners and businesses south of Broadway and had those discussions with them that it was nothing. We weren't trying to come in there and take over their property. We were going to work with them, and all of them, to a person, were interested and willing to participate.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to 7A, and I will hand it back over.
Things were going so well.
I know, we would have been done in 5 minutes, but.
7A, review approval of revised wayfinding signage package, including destinations and sign locations and content. Sonia.
Thank you to Jim, Sharon, and Dale for their expertise in helping to whittle this down from 33 signs to 15 and to just 6 destinations. So Plan Commission could review, make sure the destinations are okay, the sign content and locations of the signs are okay, and discussion of design would probably be at a future meeting.
Questions from Mr. Kugel?
Just a quick thing. From at least the first draft. It's really good map to follow. I mean, I actually took a ride around at some of the locations. I was just in Milwaukee with Mr. Bussey last weekend, and they have just really nice wayfaring signs in downtown Milwaukee that I really wasn't aware of until we were walking around down there, pointing out the different areas and different districts in the downtown area. Found it really helpful for somebody that doesn't go there very often. So I think this is a really nice start, and this is very helpful putting this map together for me.
Mr. Humber?
I would echo what Mr. Kugel just said, and I'd go so far as to suggest that we had such a great job by our subcommittee. Perhaps they would want to work on the design too, because you did a fabulous job on the first half. I'm sure you wouldn't want to leave it undone.
Nice try.
Nice
Rob?
I think it looks really great. I had one comment about eastbound on Broadway, those first few signs. Was there a specific reason that Aldo Leopold Center was left out of those?
We, I can address that.
Sure, go ahead.
We specifically noted the entrance for Aldo Leopold at Monona Drive and Broadway, given that their website calls for access from the Beltline onto Monona Drive. That way, when people get off at that exit, it's clearly directed from that location up the hill and to where you turn.
Okay.
So that's why it's that way.
Yeah, I think it looks great.
Any other comments? There's a request for approval for this. Is there a motion?
I have a comment.
Oh, sorry. Shoot.
On sign 15 is a good example of the third destination listed as Aldo Leopold Nature Center, and you can see how much longer it is in comparison to the other destinations. And Sharon has done some work with some scaled drawings, trying to figure out what the best letter height would be to be able to accommodate that in its full length. And I just wanted to make sure that there was at least a discussion. If we don't go with all 4 words, Aldo Leopold Nature Center, are there any other options that might be acceptable in order to get it to fit on the sign?
Can't you just say Aldo Leopold Center or not?
Would there like to be a member of the audience?
You could talk to about that?
Why don't you come on up and...
Well, not now, this is the first time hearing this, so that's the name of the organization, so I'm sure there's something we can try to work out, but it's not ALC, it's not
But it does create a problem in that it's lengthening.
Double stack?
There could either be double stack or a smaller font, Sharon.
Here.
Right, you've got goodies here for us.
If we can put the projector back on, let me see the overhead, then the audience can see this too.
Yeah. Yo, guys. Sharon, do you have any recommendations or comments?
Yes, yep.
One of those, is that,
Yeah,
it's not
one
really
of them.
just a matter of picking a name, it's more, how about this one?
Put on the projector.
Here.
Let's put this one.
She has the best
Okay.
one.
It just has the two words. It's not as much as picking.
You just tell me what to do, Sharon, I'll do it.
Okay, can you put that down now, Chris? Thank you. It's more what fits. So if we're looking at, and we've been talking about 4-inch high letters, so the blocks with the arrows are 4 inches high. You can see lines 2 and 3 there. Line 3 is 4-inch high lettering, and the largest line that we have anywhere on the signs other than Aldo Leopold Nature Center is Winnequa Park. So if we reduce it to something, and I'm not necessarily saying Nature Center, but if we reduce it to something like that, we can still retain the 4-inch high lettering. If we decide on something that says Aldo Leopold Nature Center, I think it goes to 2 3/4 inch lettering. Anything below 3 starts to get
Hard to read?
hard to read, yeah. 3-inch minimum would be the recommended.
I mean, they'd be coming off the belt line. They're not going to be going at a high rate of speed as far as being able to read. I mean, I don't know.
Discussion, really.
Mr. Ganser, any comments on letter size and the speed of the traffic?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Any others? Thoughts on reducing the Aldo Leopold?
I think we should have a meeting with Aldo Leopold and see what they want.
I
Or get feedback at least.
I think the feedback that I've been given is that Aldo Leopold Nature Center is the name, rather than abbreviating it, to leave it at that.
We did have other names that we did reduce, such as Monona Grove High School, where we just decided we'd better say high school because the readability was the most important thing to us, so.
Did you explore a stacked option at all?
I think that's something for us to discuss tonight.
The more lines on a sign, the less readable it is, so.
Mr. Dorschel?
Well, we have some, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I can see why Aldo Leopold would want Aldo Leopold on it, because that's how they advertise everything, and that's how they publicize everything. But the people that are going to be coming here looking for that know that it's a nature center. I mean, so if we could reduce it to Aldo Leopold Center, I mean, it seems to me that people will know exactly what kind of a center it is. That would be my inclination. If we could do it in 4-inch letters.
I think I would like to see a stacked option, just explore it to see what it would look like aesthetically, because on the signs that it is stated, there's only 3 items on one and 4 on the other ones, and we have several signs with 5 items or 6 even.
5 is all too.
5's the biggest.
15.
15 is 6.
1 is 6, plus you got all the Leopold. If you have stacked it, it'd be 7.
Oh, yeah, true.
Further comments? Was that Mr. Homburg?
Am I right, it's only on 3 signs?
Yes.
Okay. For me, if it's a big deal for them for 3 signs, I'd stack it.
So we'd have 7 lines a copy.
On the one, it'd be a big sign, wouldn't it?
It's a huge sign.
Mhm.
And that's fine, I'm not saying that's bad, but then we really need to look at reducing the letter size slightly overall on the
For
sign.
that sign, for that particular sign.
Well, this shows 4-inch, right? So on that one sign, would 3.5 help or something like that? And you said that's readable?
I think 3.5 would be okay. The minimum we'd want to be at would be 3. That would be the minimum size I would recommend. So anything larger than that certainly is better.
I think it looks odd just to see everything the same size and then all the Leopold small, more diminutive.
I'd agree.
My concern with the sign 15 and stacking has to do with the amount on there. I think that's the sign that, just given the location, has the potential for the most concern of people reading the sign, looking for information, because as people are already emerging at that location, it's a very challenging spot because the way people try to cut over quickly to get into the pier area. So I have actually the most concern about that sign, about overloading that sign already with 6 lines of text. There's part of it that I would even want us to consider, even without all the Leopold issue, of the city center and Winnequa Park, which are bringing you to 2 similar physical locations, although I know they're separate. I mean, I'm not trying to add length to any of them, but I'm trying to look at the best way to do it. Overall, I love the work that's been done with this. It's an amazing improvement compared to what has been there. I would encourage us to look at different options and engage in conversation, looking at some different options, but at the same time, it's the city proposing a sign for destinations. Earlier, we even had the discussion about when locations are selected, what makes the threshold of being on our signs. I think there's a unique relationship between the city and Aldo Leopold that makes it kind of make that list. But at the same time, the discussion regarding the school and cutting off a piece of that name, my guess is Monona Grove High School was probably not happy to see Monona Grove gone from that either, because the first high school you come into contact going up this road would be La Follette High School. So, I mean, the sign coming off the belt line, the first school that you're going to be pointing to is actually La Follette.
We're not going to point to La Follette.
I understand that.
Right.
I'm just saying if I'm coming to a school and I just see high school on the sign, to me it might indicate that I'm going to the high school with the intention of going to La Follette, and this signage plan might be bringing me to MG.
We're certainly not clarifying what high school it is. Yeah.
We probably should point out the other thing that the committee's discussed, which is, and this is not a design, it's just the elements on here, is the fact that there would be a header on top that says Monona, so that you know this is a Monona sign. And again, this is not a design because there'd be elements of the city
waves.
design, the
Yeah,
wave
Monona
and
at
things
the
on it
top
that we've talked about, but we
So
thought
that would help. That would help clarify that
'cause we did
piece,
discuss
but, yeah.
that, yeah.
Sonia?
So consensus would be that we, at this time, explore all 4 words being put on there at some sort of scale that works with the other letters, or a stacked option.
Or there was also a request at Aldo Leopold Center to see how that would fit. And then to look at, so 3 options. So we could bring this back and have a decision at this time regarding that piece of the puzzle?
I think it would be okay to consider that in a separate design phase.
Pat, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. I think we're looking at the destinations here, approval of the destinations and the sign placement locations. If that's okay with this body, we can do the design aspects at a different meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in
Aye.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Review, 7B, review of draft updated transportation element of the comprehensive plan. Sonia?
You received a copy of the 2014 version and the 2004 version. Substantial differences is it's 10 pages less. We've incorporated sustainability, consulting with the sustainability committee. They'd like it to be visible, and as you pass through the pages, how is it incorporated into the plan? So that's why the logo is put on that word box. And open to comments.
Gail, or, sorry, Brian. Brian.
If I jump to 3.3, there's no discussion of the regional bus service, particularly out of the Dutch Mill area, which was in the prior plan and continues to be a destination place for that. Regarding the Badger Bus area, the items 314, bike and pedestrian, somehow it just seems like something's missing from that first paragraph, and I don't know a way to word it, but something that talks about the multiple use for our roadways, that there is, because this was really pointing towards sidewalks for pedestrian safety, and I think there's been discussions about a lot of our road surfaces and how we promote them to be multi-use areas.
Excuse me.
Nope.
We can't do that.
All right.
If the roads don't have a designated bike lane or the required width for a bike lane, we can't encourage pedestrian activity without some sort of buffer between the roadway and the pedestrian corridor. So that's nothing I would recommend putting in this document.
You agree?
All right.
Anything else, Brian? First few notes, sir?
There's a discussion around the bike loops, and I don't believe they are actually 2 separate loops after that last revision. That it's been reduced down to the one single route. So just a point of clarification, unless that's
I think
actually not.
there's a deviation where it goes off into the scenic route. Is that
That's correct. There are actually 2 designated bike ways. There's the Monona Loop, and then there's the loop that follows along Monona Drive to Winnequa.
Okay.
Yeah.
The items 316, I referenced section G in the previous document. And that had to do with water or lake access. It didn't seem to be captured in the water transportation section.
I left that out because the way that it was addressed in the previous document was more recreational, and I think that better belongs in our natural resources element instead of the transportation element. I don't think people rely on our waterways for transportation.
All right, makes sense.
Then just get rid of water.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was it.
We're going to have a canoe launch at Ladas, that's water transportation.
There you go. It's true.
Page 3.5, the very last thing says, require traffic impact analysis with new development where feasible and necessary. That could be interpreted a little strictly. I'm suggesting maybe we'll say require traffic impact analysis with new large-scale development where or when appropriate. I wouldn't want to come into a public hearing and we're having, like tonight, that small strip center, somebody says, well, I demand it, it's in your thing, I demand a traffic impact analysis for that. We build our infrastructure to handle a certain amount of traffic. We encourage those businesses and those residences to come, and there's a certain level that I think we anticipate. I think where it's appropriate to require that traffic impact analysis is an unusual project or something that really changes the dynamics of an area that we didn't plan on. So there might be a better way to word it, but I just don't want somebody to use it as a tool to block a regular, normal business relocation or something along those lines. And I'm sure between you and Pat, you'll have a much better way to word it than I just did.
Anything else, Mr. Umber?
It's a recommendation. Yeah. Oh, you want a motion on this whole document?
Well, no, I was.
No. Well, it's yeah, it would be part of it just to maybe reword that a little bit in that vein.
Okay. On 31.4, it mentions, second sentence, some collector streets including Dean Avenue and Nichols Road. Yet on 3.2, the main collector streets in Monona are Winnequa, Midmore, Nichols Bridge, and Femrite. Should Dean be included as a collector?
I think it should be. I must have missed it.
So I think as much traffic as possible should get on Dean Road, right, Mr. Kugel? Any other comments? You gonna make a motion, Mr. Amber?
Sure, I move approval with the recommendations we've already gone over tonight.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. 7C, staff report regarding status of development project proposals. Sonia.
First, I'd like to welcome Diana. She's going to be working with us for a little bit. It's a new intern. She's a landscape architecture degree and master's in urban and regional planning, and some experience in China and Taiwan. The next upcoming meetings, 4 left for the year. November 10th is the next meeting. General Development Plan will come back for Royal Capital Group. The request for the mixed-use development on East Broadway. We'll also look at, if that's the only thing on the agenda, probably getting the intergovernmental cooperation element of the comprehensive plan on there. The next meeting's November 24th, December 8th, Monday night Packer football. We can discuss that meeting, and then the next meeting is December 22nd, which is close to Christmas.
What's there to discuss about the 8th?
Sorry, we can cancel that meeting.
Or reschedule.
No, I would think that would just be a must that we meet then.
If we don't have December 8th and 22nd, we might need to hold a special meeting in December, but we can see how it goes.
Notice you wore gold tonight.
Yeah.
Might be the issue.
They have remote access.
Any,
The last thing is comprehensive plan update. We have, I think, 3 to go: housing, utilities, community facilities, and implementation after the, and intergovernmental cooperation. So 4 total to go. Public input meeting is going to be held on November 12th. We're working together with the Sustainability Committee to hold it jointly to review, to get public input on both the sustainability plan and the comprehensive plan. So it's November 12th, I believe 6 or 6:30. I'll send out.
Who's hosting the meeting?
It'll be at the community center.
I would suspect Plan Commission needs to host it since we're responsible for the comprehensive plan, if it's a comprehensive plan.
It would, yeah, it's together, Plan Commission and Sustainability Committee. The reason November 12th was selected is because there aren't that many dates left before the holidays, before the end of the year. If November 12th doesn't work, if you'd like to suggest a different date, that's fine. We likely wouldn't be able to hold it jointly with the Sustainability Committee.
I am out of town, but that's...
I have a conflict too, on the 12th.
But that's just 2. Okay.
We have all we need is a quorum, so.
Okay. 7D, Plan Commission request for information.
Yeah, we actually don't have to have a public body present for a public forum. There's not going to be any action taking place. It would just be comments and recommendations from the public, so they wouldn't have to have a quorum present.
Seems like we'd want to be though, wouldn't we? If it's our only public hearing.
That's fine. If you'd like, do you want me to send out a poll and find a time where everyone would agree and we can do an independent public input meeting, have more time to plan for it, and not do it jointly with the Sustainability Committee?
I think
that'd be my preference.
From the public, though, would they be better served to be able to come out in one night and attack 2 different issues? My vote would be to hold it jointly and let them, the public have.
Meeting with the Sustainability Committee.
Yeah, Brian?
Is there any reason that it can't be that joint meeting and then also have a secondary meeting that's paired with one of our nights that we're meeting as an agenda item?
You can have a public hearing on the agenda, but it's up to this body.
So we did in the past, we had a public hearing during a regularly scheduled Plan Commission meeting.
We have?
For the 10 years ago, yeah. That's how we did it.
I believe we have a public hearing written into our public participation procedures on the entire draft of the plan. I can double check on if there's actually a separate public input opportunity, which would be something of a different format, like an open house or presentation on where we are right now. So I can double check on that, but we will definitely be holding an input section on the agenda for the entire draft at a regular meeting.
The November 12th meeting is just to gather public input?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't know, but it seems to me that there are a lot of bodies involved in
Yeah.
terms of the plan, in terms of the public hearing. I don't know that the Plan Commission has to be directly involved with it. Those members that want to attend can attend. I don't care.
Why don't we talk about it, and if there's not any requirement that we meet as a body, then we could meet individually or attend individually.
Well, and I'm concerned that it's going to be driven then by one section or one committee versus everything, and people are going to come certainly to review the sustainability plan, et cetera, but will our public hearing be skewed because it's being held jointly with that? It'll have certainly a preponderance of comments on sustainability, no question about that, but will it have a fair review, and will we be able to even judge the fair review based on having it at the same time as another committee's core plan?
Feelings, commission members?
Is sustainability one portion of the plan?
It's not a separate element, but it's scattered throughout the plan and considered in all of our land use decisions.
I think if we have a way that that information is collected, likely it's going to be pointing to more of those elements, and we also have other forums for people to participate. I think it still would meet the intention of what we're trying to meet. If that was the only meeting, I think there's some value to that comment of, boy, if you only hold it in this little area with these people, a certain group of individuals that are more likely to turn out to that, do you skew your results? I think that would be true, but I think the more opportunities that we provide people to give input that are in different venues, I think it's a positive idea.
So if we held a second meeting, not do it the same night, what burden does that put on staff? And
There's going to be a public hearing before this body anyway, so I don't see a major issue in it. We did, the plan was reviewed by the CDA, the economic development component of it, at that meeting, and obviously they had an economic development thought process when they went in there in reviewing that. So I would think sustainability would have the same input. You know, they want to be focused on their issues there, but it's going to have its opportunity for a public hearing here at the end, and I would think that's what this body would weigh, is the entire document. Odds are you're going to have about 2 people here anyway, so I don't want to
Yeah.
We've had.
We were trying to think back 10 years.
Did you really say that on camera?
I'm just trying to encourage people to come.
Yes.
By saying that, because I've been at a lot of council public hearings over multi-million-dollar budgets, so.
And nobody's there. So, Pat, are you saying that there wouldn't be a major strain to hold a second or choose a different date?
No, not on our behalf, because we were planning on being at both anyway, so.
Okay. And in light of the comments that were made, we'll head down that path then? Everybody okay with that? Yeah. See no objection. Let's do it. Request for information concerning development projects. Commission, any requests? Wow. Seeing none, we move on to number 8. Ron?
Move to adjourn.
All right. Mr. Ganser.
You're supposed to second this.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.